This is Christopher Sernaque hosting episode 25 of season 5 of the Current Topics in Science podcast. Today, for the grand finale of season 5, we're going to be going over the best evidence for intelligent design with Dr. Meyer, Dr. Gonzalez, Dr. Luskin, Dr. Miller, and Dr. Nemati. We had the immense honor of being invited to Discovery Institute's summer seminar, where we were graciously given the opportunity to do some in-person interviews. I hope you enjoyed this special podcast episode and check out more when you finish this one. This podcast is available on the following platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Video recordings of the podcast will be uploaded to YouTube. Enjoy the podcast.
Well, my favorite evidence for intelligent design is the information that's stored in the DNA molecule. It's actually stored in a digital, or you could say typographic or alphabetic form. This was the famous sequence hypothesis of Francis Crick, where he realized that the nucleotide bases that run along the interior of the famed double helix are functioning like alphabetic characters in a written language, or the digital characters, the zeros and ones that we use in software today. Crick came to this as he was thinking about how does the DNA direct the construction of proteins, and he realized it was using information in this kind of a digital form. And I think that's really an extraordinary discovery, because we know from our experience that information always arises from an intelligent source. Bill Gates has characterized the information in DNA as being like a software program. Richard Dawkins has said that it's like machine code. Well, we know that software comes from programmers, machine code the same, especially when we find it in a digital or alphabetic form, whether we're talking about a paragraph in a book, or hieroglyphic inscription, or even information embedded in a radio signal. If you trace information back to its ultimate source, you always come to a mind, not a material process. So the discovery of information stored in the DNA molecule is, I think, a powerful indicator of the activity of a prior designing intelligence in the history of life.
In my field of astronomy, I would say the best evidence for intelligent design is the evidence on the Earth that we can see the stars, we can see rainbows, we can see total solar eclipses, and all these things and many more allow us to make important scientific discoveries, to learn more about the distant universe. It's surprising that we live on a planet that allows such a diversity of different kinds of scientifically important observations. In addition, we have access to vast resources, mineral resources, that allow us to build our scientific instruments and develop high technology that allow us to explore the universe. This all together, we put it together, it points to evidence that the universe is designed for scientific discovery. So it seems that this science itself was a mandate.
Well, my field is geology, but I also have quite a bit of background in studying fossils. I've taken coursework in paleontology and geobiology, and done a little bit of sampling in terms of that area as well in my field work, I guess. So I think that the best evidence for intelligent design from that field of the fossil record, paleontology, would be the pattern of explosions that we see throughout the history of life, where basically many new types of organisms will appear abruptly in the fossil record without clear and direct evolutionary precursors. And I think this is very powerful evidence for intelligent design, because first of all, Darwinian evolution predicts you'll have sort of this gradual buildup and evolutionary unfolding of a clade or a taxa, and you should find that reflected in the fossil record by discovering transitional forms. And I'm not going to say that there are no fossils that have ever been found that could be transitional forms. There are some that are potential candidates, but by and large, they're very rare, if not, absent from many groups. And so what we do see, though, is this repeating pattern of explosions where organisms appear abruptly without these evolutionary precursors. That is consistent with intelligent design because intelligent design says that intelligent agents can rapidly introduce large amounts of new information into a system. And so an intelligent agent could rapidly introduce large amounts of information into the biosphere, which would be reflected in the form of new body plans. And body plans require an immense amount of information for them to come into existence. You have to change the gene regulatory networks that help control embryonic development. You have to produce all kinds of new genes that are going to code for body parts, or exoskeletons for arthropods, or skin for vertebrates. All kinds of different genes that are needed to encode these various types of organisms, and all of that requires information. So the origin of new types of organisms is really equivalent to the origin of genetic information, and that's what we're seeing reflected in these abrupt appearance of species in the fossil record. We're seeing large amounts of information that was rapidly introduced into the biosphere without a gradual evolutionary buildup. And I think the only way you can really explain that is through an intelligent cause.
Well, I think the strongest evidence deals with studies of minimally complex cells, because many researchers have said, how simple can a cell become before it stops to function? And also, myself and others are researching how that research compares to studies of minimally complex self-replicating machines. And that research started with people like von Neumann, but it's been continued by organizations like NASA. And what happens is when you look at the research of minimally complex self-replicating machines, and you compare it to the research of minimally complex cells, you really see a strong correlation between the functions that are needed. So for any cell to work at even the most basic level, it's got to have information processing, energy production, error correction, waste disposal, active transport of control gates, and many other features, which show very clear evidence of design.
I think for me, the one that really stood out was the importance of information and organization in biological systems. Meaning that the typical way we were all taught to think about biology was through chemistry. In other words, it's through a materialist framework that reduces biology to chemistry. That if the right molecules show up in the right places, somehow it will all come together. But biology really is much more described by organization. And organization is actually, doesn't have an origin that we know of. There is no known origin of organization except from the mind of a creator or from the mind of an intelligent person. And so we talk about information being important in biology, and we talk about organization being important in biology. And they're somewhat related because the organization is described in information. And so when an organism reproduces, it's carrying the information about the organization that is needed through those means that it has, including the DNA, to transmit the information about the organization. But to me, the big thing was that at that time, I think it was 150 years had passed since Darwin. And why would this now be the big news? This should have been recognized, 150 years ago. Now it's been longer than that. The observation was that materialism actually closed our minds to the point that we saw the world not in its multi-aspectual nature, but through this reductionist picture that reduces everything to a materialist origin. And something like organization doesn't fit there. It doesn't fit in a materialist picture of the world. Therefore, biology itself was hindered over 100 years. And really, it's still hindered. It's only the intelligent design folks that have really, first they were mocked for it, and now they have to be, addressed, which is that they're bringing the information challenge, the organizational challenge, to the debate of the origin of species and the origin of life.
To me, As someone who studied forensic science and forensic psychology, the greatest evidence for the scientific theory of intelligent design is that intelligent design's application of forensic science is superb. Think about it like this. A forensic investigator is able to discern agency. In fact, the entire field of forensic science depends on scientists being able to distinguish between the actions of an intelligent agent and unguided natural happenstance. For instance, when a forensic investigator arrives on the scene of a burned down building, they have two options. Either this building is burned down due to natural processes and conditions, or due to the actions, forethought, and design of an agent acting with intention. The scene of a building burned down due to a lightning strike, a natural gas leak, or a forest fire lacks one key thing: purpose. Purpose indicates forethought and planning, and from our uniform and repeated experience, as Dr. Meyer said, we know of only one cause of purposeful intention or foresight, that cause being intelligent design. In fact, according to the Oxford Language Dictionary, one of the synonyms for foresight is presence of mind. So when a forensic investigator sees evidence of multiple ignition sites, chemical residue of the fuel source or the accelerant at key or unexpected locations, evidence of tampering with components or electrical devices, evidence of forced entry, or the fact that the majority of the burning occurred on the floor instead of the ceiling, they're right in concluding arson because all of those signs point to the deliberate and purposeful actions of an intelligent agent. Likewise, when scientists who advocate the scientific theory of intelligent design see complex and specified information in the digital code of DNA or the purposeful arrangement of parts in molecular machines like the ATP synthase motor or topoisomerase, they're not only well within a proper application of forensic science, but they're actually making an inference to the very best explanation: intelligent design. And now, to our listeners, thank you very much for taking the time to learn with us on Current Topics in Science, where scientific discoveries are examined in light of the origins issue. Please share and subscribe to the Current Topics in Science podcast, and in the description, you'll find a link to the Discovery Institute and a link to the Christ Jesus Ministries merch store. This podcast is available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Thanks again for listening, and remember, the truth saves.